David Clark.
Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House will be supporting the bill, as the Minister indicated, but that across there is a Minister under pressure. The clock is ticking, Dr Coleman, the clock is ticking. He says not from me, he makes it personal. This is actually an issue about the people of the South being able to access adequate health care. And that is why on this side of the House we are putting the politics aside for a while to give the opportunity for the Minister to make real progress, because his government, unfortunately, has let the situation become so dire in the South. This problem that exists in the Southern District Health Board, where it's struggled to meet its financial targets, where the building of a substitute hospital has been pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, where the government itself has failed to commit fully to a rebuild, is an ongoing matter. And it didn't start last year. It started with this government years ago. It has had a Crown Monitor on the board for 6 years, Mr Speaker. It appointed the previous board chair and 5 of the 12 board members. This government has been all over the Southern DHB for 6 or more years, Mr Speaker, and worried about the status of the progress down there on the issues that matter for the South. And of course it must take some blame. The failed HBL, Health Benefits Limited proposal, that dragged capacity out of the South in terms of financial planning, was an initiative of this government. They failed to succeed in producing what was promised with that initiative, and eventually it folded. But the damage was done. The capacity, the management capacity, the planning capacity that existed in the South, some of that was leached away during that period. They have only made the situation worse so far. And finally, the Minister has said this is starting to reflect badly on him. Goodness knows why it took him so long to come to that conclusion. And so he has appointed some commissioners to step in to try to rectify the situation. Of course, some of the fundamentals that contribute to it, they're not going near. The underfunding. This government has underfunded health by $1.7 billion. That is independent analysis using Treasury figures that has determined that while the costs of health have been rising, this government has not funded it adequately, and so healthcare around the country is suffering. $1.7 billion is no trifling amount, and it's no wonder that Kiwis are struggling to get the health care that they normally would get. Middle New Zealand is suffering, while the government is more focused on the interests of those at the very top, the very wealthy, the mega rich, and Middle New Zealand is suffering. So here we have finally an intervention which says, well, maybe we do care about health. It's come late, and we support the fact that the government is saying it's going to do something. But it comes, of course, with strings attached. Our support is there because we want to see progress. Our support is there because we want to see good health care for the South. The Minister is now under pressure, the clock is ticking, and we haven't seen much progress to date. We haven't seen much progress to date. In the Select Committee, the issues of transparency were raised. We want to see on this side of the House measurable progress. We want to see measures put in place that we can measure progress against. And so far, the Commissioners have produced a one-page strategic planning document that looks more like a Christmas card than a plan. We've got a partnership group in place that is supposed to be designing the new hospital, and from them we have seen very little. They've been asked to produce very little, to be fair to the group, and they have obliged thus far. We have not seen real progress on the hospital rebuild. We've not seen a commitment from the government in terms of capital and a start date for a rebuild. All we've heard are some amorphous kind of projections. A new hospital will be there in 10 years' time. Well, for goodness sake, that is pushing out the obligation to a future government. This government does not seem fully committed to healthcare in the South. But here is the Minister saying that he is going to do something about it. He's appointed his own people. They've been in place now for coming up a year. It'll be a year at the end of June. It'll be a year. And then we will expect to see real progress, and so far we have not seen much. So that's why that Minister is under pressure, and he is feeling the heat, and so he should be. Annette King has him under pressure every day in the House. They are failing to deliver, and it's that $1.7 billion of underfunding that means they are going to continue to struggle to deliver. But Mr Coleman has nowhere to hide. He's now tied to the commissioners he's appointed. He's now tied to those commissioners. And of course, We know the situation came about because, in part, when the Southern District Health Board came out of the merger of two health boards, $30 million was lost with the removal of the boundary. And we'll hear shortly the member for Clutha Southland get up and say, you know, the funding is adequate. He'll ignore his constituents who are concerned they're not getting the operations that they ought to be getting. He's not concerned about Middle New Zealand. He's not concerned about the people who need the healthcare who are no longer getting it. He's not hearing those concerns. He says all his rich mates can get every operation they need whenever they need it. They can get private healthcare if the public healthcare system's not delivering. That is the out of touch, increasingly out of touch government we see opposite us. We know funding matters, and we on this side of the House also know democracy matters. In the Select Committee stage, the Honourable Annette King, the formidable Honourable Annette King, put forward a wonderful SOP which would have given the government the opportunity through an order in council to restore democracy sooner if they thought real progress was being made. They declined that opportunity. They didn't want to have that opportunity put in play. They want the full term. Mr. Speaker, they will have the full term with this Commissioner in place, and we expect real progress as a result. We want to see the finances coming under control, but we also want to see the delivery of services. We want to see structure and capacity rebuilt. We want to see good governance in our local DHB, and we want to see capital commitment from this government, capital commitment and a credible timeframe that starts with a rebuild start date. When will the first sod be turned? Will the government commit to a tertiary level hospital of the same quality that Dunedin has historically enjoyed? And will we have services restored such as training, which have been removed because our buildings are decrepit and no longer fit for purpose? They were designed over 50 years ago, Mr. Speaker. It's no wonder. Modern hospitals are different. We would expect something different. It's Dunedin's turn. It's the last major metropolitan centre in New Zealand to get its hospital rebuilt, and this government seems shy of committing to it. Mr. Speaker, we know the funding formula is flawed. It needs a deep and full review. For example, the Southern District covers an area roughly the size of Belgium, but doesn't have a sufficient rural funding component. South Canterbury has a much bigger one. How can that possibly be? It makes no sense. There are some anomalies that need a proper and full review. We know older styles of building require more money to run because they're less efficient. The operations that are run are less efficient than the modern practices. There is no compensation for that in the case of the South. The major tertiary hospital is out of date and people are forced to make do. And we know that leads to stretched staffing ratios, and we know that leads to stress in the workplace. So we want to see some progress on the hospital rebuild and measurable timeframes put around that and a commitment of capital up front. Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, we've got problems with asbestos in our local hospital. We've got concerned citizens who recognise that they are not getting the same service as other DHBs are around the country. And this is a minister under pressure. He is not addressing these issues as quickly as he should be. But we are supporting this, and my colleague Claire Curran, I read her comments in the newspaper the other day where she said, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, that it was somewhat galling to have to support this bill. And I think that captures it, because here we are with a situation where democracy is being taken away from the members, the people, the citizens in the South because of this government's failures. It's very hard to support democracy being taken away, even if only for a short period of time. It is hard for us to do that, but we're doing it because we think it ties the minister so closely to the outcomes. He is under pressure, the clock is ticking. We want to see real progress on planning, on financial stability, on capacity, on governance, on a rebuild. We need these commitments from the minister, and we need to see real progress. He is being watched in the South. Healthcare affects every New Zealander, and it affects people in the South no less. For decades, this hospital has been moving closer to its end date, and the regional neglect of this government is only something that's contributed further to that. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I want to say that people in the South pay their taxes, and the government cannot forever put off the commitment to making sure that the services are delivered that are desired and needed and reasonably expected in the South.
Mr. Chair.
I call Simon